Social, emotional, and moral development in adolescence. By Meeker, PSY304. Today's date is 15 March 2021. Adolescents are at a period of their life where they're really struggling to find out who they are. Identity is a critical issue, and there are contradictions going on throughout their lives. They wonder who they are, who they perceive themselves to be, how do others perceive them. Everyone around them seems to be putting pressure on them, but no pressure is as great as what they put on themselves. So they're struggling to find out who they are and who others consider that they are. One important goal through adolescent development is to be able to regulate their emotions, their social interactions, and their moral influences so that they can control and influence more directly themselves how they're being perceived and what area they project. In social development, it's really important that adolescents become attached to their peers. That's one of the stages of adulthood. Pulling away from their parents and becoming less dependent on them is a stage or a measuring stick of progressing towards adulthood. This does not, however, excuse parents or adults from influencing adolescents. It's critical that that influence continues. There's multiple studies that show that positive behavior is connected to parental influence as well as the negative behaviors such as illicit drug use, excessive sexual contact, and depression and suicide greatly diminish with positive adult influence. Adolescence is a time where the brain is susceptible to influence from multiple areas. It's especially pliable and elastic. So it's critical that social development occurs from positive influences. Temperament, however, does connect to parental and biological influence, but it can be shaped. It's not set in stone, essentially. It can be flexible and it can be influenced. One interesting finding is that actual peer pressure has been found to be less effective as an agent of change than how much adolescents perceive that other people are doing things. Essentially, adolescents wonder more often what their peers are actually doing than they actually react to the actions and influences of their peers. This term is referred to as pluralistic ignorance in a study that I cited, and it basically shows that a lot of people will not engage in a behavior that they feel is inappropriate for a group to do, but when polled, they actually believe more people are doing it other than themselves. So essentially, they're not going to engage in conduct, but they believe everyone else is doing it, even if they're not. I think that's one thing that media advertisers have been very successful with. This leads me to conclude that peer pressure is not as much of an influence as how much people perceive they are being pressured by their peers. It's critical that adults provide examples of wise choices to help adolescents transition and make good, responsible decisions from a social development area. Emotional development is an ongoing process. It starts at birth and hopefully continues positively throughout our entire life. These fluctuations, though, tend to be very drastic and very common with adolescents, where those who are more emotionally mature may react appropriately or may react in a minor way. Adolescents tend to react in extremes and maybe fly off the handle or react with an anger or a rage or a depression that doesn't seem appropriate to those of us who are more emotionally mature. It's critical that adolescents, especially teens, are equipped with emotional tools to help them self-regulate, to get to the point where they're independent or at least less dependent on the influences of those around them. Going on with emotional development, University of Delaware fact sheet broke this down into 5 main areas that I thought were interesting. The first is that adolescents are struggling to identify themselves, who they really are versus who they want to be versus, again, who they think other people think them to be. The second area is becoming autonomous from their parents, creating that separation. While they still need their parents financially, emotionally, socially, they don't want to acknowledge just how much that need is, and they want to become independent. The third is creating an intimate relationship. Often you have individuals in the adolescent stage that confuse intimacy with sex or intimacy with physical contact, and they don't focus on establishing trust and accountability relationships as much as they should. Sadly, that's not something that's unique just to adolescents. Finally, the fourth stage is identifying and embracing their own sexuality. Who and what are they going to be? How are they going to act on their attractions? And finally, achievement. Whose goals are important? How much do they want to chase their parents' aspirations for themselves versus establishing their own goals? Morality. One interesting definition of morality is the way people choose to live their lives based on the guidelines around them. There's two different types of moralities, intrapersonal and interpersonal. Interpersonal is how you interact with others, and interpersonal is how you make decisions if you were existing in a vacuum. How is it you would decide to do things if you were alone? How do you obtain these moral behaviors? A lot of different factors come into play, but adolescents usually display characteristics that are going to make healthy choices based on the influences they have around them. So if as adults we can increase the rewards and provide ideas that it is successful for people to make positive moral decisions, then the brain centers that react on rewards and success will be wired to making more positive decisions as well. Schreiner and Schreiner in our text identify Kohlberg stages of development, and one of the areas that I focused on is transitioning from conventional reasoning. Basically, everyone else or authority figures tell young children what the moral decisions are and what the consequences of those actions are, to a level 3, which is post-conventional. You decide for yourself what your own moral decisions are, what your own moral compasses are, and it's more on social contract rather than hard and fast punishments. What is going to be the reaction of society to your decisions? And that influences more in post-conventional reasoning. Finally, as parents, influence cannot be overlooked. Even though adolescents are trying to pull away from parents, what they see in their parents, they end up modeling, according to a study by Green. They end up modeling more in their own lives, whether they want to admit it or not. It's complicated. Raising teenagers is a difficult process. Being a teacher is complicated. Being a mentor or a coach is tough work. However, as adults, we have a responsibility, and that's to set positive examples. We have to reduce the way that we interact negatively, especially through social media. We can't be keyboard warriors and then expect our children to have responsible online personas. We can't throw things across the room or say cruel or mean words and expect our children to react in an emotionally healthy way. And finally, our morality has to be independent of what others tell us. We can take those influences, but we must model the kind of morality we want our children to emulate. When we start setting better examples, I think we give our adolescents a better compass to use as they find their development direction.